Let's go configure SNMP version to be on the SA for the same reason and see if on the SA we have better luck with the to work. Conft, the same steps. SNMP server group is gonna be, let's say, sense group v3 model to be priv, likewise, and SNMP server user name of the user, let's say ASA user, is going to be a different username. Member of the sense group v3, and then it's going to be, let's say, authentication part is going to be MD5, and the password is going to be ASA, and priv with this password being ASA. And then the last step is an NP server host 172.16.10.100. Server host on the is reachable on gig 0091 interface, the server, which means SRV interface, the address of the manager, version 3, and the group T user to be ASA user. Let's go in the manager and also add ASA. So say edit, settings, add a new one, which is going to be 172.16.10.1. That's the IP address of the ASA in that interface. So 172.16.10.1 is going to be ASA user MD5 this, and this is going to be a password of ASA for both authentication and encryption. Apply and say OK. And OK. Please arrow select a v3 user entry. Okay. So let's say view again, file, load all maps. And let's go to view and trap viewer again. Let's do operations. Let's say get to see if I can actually read both the SA and the router. Operations get. It says no object is specified. Okay, but we have to also put in there it's clear a problem with this tool in here. 172.16.10.2. Let's try again operations, not operations, view, trap viewer to look on the SA and see if a link goes down. Let's verify the SA configuration as well first of all till we move on. Show SNMP server host. So it tells you the user, the version, auto reach interface, is that manager reachable, what is the IP. Show SNMP server user. Likewise shows you the username, the protocol used for authentication and for encryption, and the group to which group is it a member of, but it doesn't show likewise the authentication and the encryption passwords. And show SNMP group for security reasons. You're going to show, of course, the configure group. What is the security model priv, which means both authentication and privilege. And notify view, also the default one, because I've configured the SNMP server in there. Let's say debug SNMP, and let's go on the SA and let's shut down this interface of gig01. Do show debug. Show debugging is the SA, not the iOS. Debug SNMP doesn't have a level. Show IP interface brief. Show interface IP brief is the SA. So gig01 was shut down. Let's unshut it. No shutdown. And let's look on the... Of course, I didn't start. And let's say start. So configuration was successful, but for whatever reason, none of the devices want to send the traps in there. Include SNMP. Well, so accidentally I have only enabled the traps only for this. So let's say enable traps for, so that could be probably, that's the problem 100% in this case. Let's enable all traps actually. So show run include SNMP. I've enabled all traps, and on the SA likewise the same thing. So I probably accidentally enabled only partial of the traps, not all of them. Just enable all traps. Let's go back on router 2 and let's redo the example. Shut the link. Let's shut it down. Shut down, and let's wait a couple of seconds. Do show debugging. Debug SNMP packet. And debug SNMP detail. And now let's go and unshut the interface. So this time it should work. No shutdown. Oh, there we go. It says version 2, but it's not version 2. So do undebug all. It says that a version 2 trap was sent to that server, but we know it's not version 2 because clearly if you say show SNMP server, it says version 2 in the debug because it's the same format of the trap. That's the reason. Show SNMP host. We know that out to that destination, out to that manager, we can only send traps of type v3 with that model. So at the debug output, it shows up to be a v2 just because it uses the same format, but actually it's going to be encrypted and authenticated using the configured version 3 statements. So likewise the SA3, if we say show debug, and we say interface, that interface of gig01, let's say shut down. All debug messages on DSA are going to show up by default. We don't have to enable logging under the console, just logging has to be enabled. And logging console is disabled. Logging on. We're just in logging on to be enabled. Show logging. Clear logging. Buffer. And show run include SNMP. Just to make sure I enabled all SNMP traps. Well, let's see if link up, link down should be okay in there. SNMP link up and link down, so it was there, so we should send an SNMP trap in there. So that the router has sent finally the message, the trap in there. So the problem was that in here, when I enabled the traps on router 2, I accidentally initially enabled traps only for, instead of setting enable traps enter to enable all traps, I accidentally enabled the traps only for what showed up in here. Which was only entity sensor threshold. And the debug output made sense because what this means is that when the interface went down, the router read the MIPS from the dot, from the root of the tree. And because the traps were not enabled for link going up down, that clearly it failed to send the notification because it was not enabled for that. So the output pretty much makes sense in here. Now, and there we go. We received from both router 1 and router 2. So from router 2, we say stop, we say show details. So a V3 trap was received from router 2. There we go, which says interface gig01 went down. So interface gig01 went down. There we go. That is, of course, from router 2. And from ASA3, we see pretty much the same message. From ASA3, which is the .1, details. It states in there that the object ID of whatever that is. So the output is a bit different from the SA. The interface index number 4. So the SA sends things this differently. The SA says that interface with an index number of number 4, which is that a gig interface, which I shut it down. It's now admin status probably changed to 4, which is to a value of 2, which means it changed to down. So it's a different format from the SA, but pretty much is the same output. We see that it worked to send the traps back and forth. Okay, so the problem was on both the ASA and the iOS that I accidentally forgot to enable all traps. I just enabled traps for something specifically, which of course didn't include the link up, link down type of let's say notification. So that's why it didn't work. So a couple of questions in here. Let's see. So Ali was saying, does it need to open port 162? So once you enable the manager, once you enable the agent for traps, he's going to be able to send messages on port 162. So the router, what this means, the router doesn't need to have the port 162 opened. So once you go on the router, like on router 2 or on the SA3, and enable them for traps, it means that they're going to be able to send traffic to the manager in a format of traps with a destination port of 162. So the traps are going to be outgoing messages from the network devices from the agent to the manager, not the other way around. And because it's traps, it uses UDP, it's not acknowledged. So what I think I would recommend from Hamdi, first we test with SNMP version 2, may it wouldn't be occur with table lookup. So clearly one option would have been to go back to version 2 and see that if it works, but that was not a, I mean that's not an option. What I would have done if it still didn't work, I would have changed back, I would have still preserved version 3, but changed to a less secure, let's say, model to see if it's any kind of unsupported, let's say, capability on the agent or on the manager. Because even though configuration wise you have some commands available, it can happen that those commands do nothing on those devices because they're actually not supported by those specific platforms. So that can happen. So that was if it didn't work, my next thing to do was to change from the auth priv security model to no auth no priv to see if barebone version 3 traps are working back and forth. Because if there's a problem, clearly it should have been a problem on the authentication part or on the encryption part. From Peter N, on iOS I think you need SNMP server enabled traps link up down. Though I'm testing on a different version than you are, so that maybe not be for your setup. So I have done that. So Peter, the problem was that I have done that before. I enabled the traps, but I enabled the traps unfortunately when I use question mark. I enable the traps for something different, for something specifically. Because by default, if you just enable traps and if you hit enter, you're gonna enable all traps on the device. But unfortunately, I chose when I hit question mark, I put in there a keyword of something which enabled traps only for only specific types of traps, which didn't include the link up, link down type of traps. Piyush said, "Can we reboot the agent from the server?" That's if you have if I'm not let's say an SNMP master. But that would mean to be able to reboot the agent from the server, it would mean that from my point of view, you need to have read-write access. And I'm not 100% sure. We can look in our CISCO documentation, but I would state that's not possible because that is a huge security risk from my point of view to be able to reboot the managed device from the manager. I mean, imagine that if I'm a disgruntled employee, which I'm going to be fired tomorrow, I'm going to go on the manager and reboot all devices 10 times in a row, So from my point of view, that should not be allowed. So let's look it up on CISCO documentation. This should not work 100% from my point of view, but of course I'm not 100% sure of this answer. Let's say reboot device from SNMP manager. Yes, it says on TCP/IP network, terminals can be reset remotely using SNMP. So probably it has to do the reboot CISCO device, because let's see what CISCO does from SNMP manager. Reload router with use of SNMP. So there's a procedure, so it is supported, which from my point of view it's a huge risk that's there, but whatever. So follow this procedure, which means you need access to that specific MIB OID value, and the router should support, yes, so by default that's not enabled, so there is a built-in security mechanism in there. Because first of all, of course, to reboot the router you need read-write access. That makes sense in here, so you need read-write access to the router. But secondly, you also have to enable that capability. So there is you can do it, but there is a built-in security mechanism that capability is not on by default. You have to enable it on the router.